In this episode of Leading Out Loud, our guest David Liss shares the realities of leadership in veterinary emergency medicine. The conversation highlights what makes high performing emergency teams successful, from continuous improvement and psychological safety to strong communication and leadership presence. David emphasizes the importance of showing up for teams across all shifts, while also discussing the balance between reactive problem solving and long term strategic thinking. David, hello. Good to see you.
Bridget, thanks for having me. It's so good to see you as well.
I know it's been too long. I was thinking about it. I don't think we've technically ever worked together, but somehow our paths constantly cross. So I've known
Yeah.
you for years, if not like over a decade, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. I agree. I was thinking about it. We talked forever. We worked through Ignite. I've seen you at conferences.
Yes.
So, I mean, I feel like we've just been colleagues for so long. It's incredible.
Totally. Yeah. Well, thank you. So, if you don't mind, David, and for those listening, we have with us David Bliss. Just high level, if you can share some of your career history for people that maybe don't know you.
Sure. Yeah. So it's good to connect with all of you. I know that this is recorded. I'm excited to chat with Bridget today and have you all listen in. So yeah, my name is David Liss. I am currently the vice president of nursing operations for Veterinary Emergency Group, VEG for pets. We're headquartered here in New York, and we have about 130 veterinary ERs across the country in about 30 states. I have actually been in veterinary med my whole career. I started out in high school working in kennels and tried to pursue a career as a veterinarian. And the short story is that I actually not did not get into vet school the first time and was actually working as an RVT. I got my license and a position for a nursing supervisor opened up. And I actually thought I love animals and medicine, but I also really enjoy people and I enjoy the challenges and kind of all of that. I'm a very curious person by nature. And so I took that job and I was in my 20s and making decent money. And I just kind of started, and that brought me on a path of basically supervisor to department manager, hospital administrator. I was a multi site director for about 5 years. Then I started with Veg as a multi site director. And then we have a role called market owner, where we oversee all of the verticals of a unit of hospitals. And then about a year and a half ago, this position opened up and they said, you're an operator and have a nurse background. Would you be interested in looking into the role? And I said, absolutely. And they said it requires a move to New York. And I said, that sounds amazing. So I've moved all over the country. I've worked, overseen hundreds of hospitals from GPs to urgent cares to 24-hour hospitals and still maintain my license in California. So I'm still an RVT, but I've loved the industry and I've been really fortunate to find kind of the operational vertical as my cup of tea.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the reasons I was excited to talk to you today is really to focus on leadership, particularly in the emergency setting, because
Sure,
as we know, it is very different
sure.
than general practice. So I think that it deserves its own episode to really
Absolutely.
highlight. So, David, in the fact that you've worked both on the floor in critical care and in both hospital and operator roles. What do you feel that frontline experience, how did it shape the way that you lead teams today?
Sure. That's such a good question, and it's one of those questions that has kind of a whole journey answer to it. What I think I can, kind of summarize a bit is there is a level of resilience, and I kind of call it like code switching, right? Your brain's kind of jumping between different things that a veterinary nurse that works in an ER has to really learn. There's no other way to do it. You are faced with, constantly changing situations. You have, your medication on the shelf is fully stocked, and then this pet comes in and you use it all, and then the next pet comes in and you're out of it, right? That's not something that other practices will face all that often. You have, a set of staff members and your highest person calls out and then the sickest pet walks in the door. And so you're constantly working through all of that. And it's not bad or wrong. I think there's a lot of heaviness that gets attached to ER, which of course I understand, but I also like to just say that is just the reality. It's what happens in an ER, it's what that industry is, and it's not for everybody, and that's totally fine. So having worked in the ER, I think having kind of grown up through that and had to have been a veterinary technician nurse on the floor so, the beginning of no leadership title and having to make decisions in the moment with the doctor saying, hey, I think you should give this medication, or hey, I've seen this work, or hey, this staff member's coming in late, or all of that really challenges your ability to take ownership of something. And I think that that served me really well in my roles, for sure in the field when I've overseen hospitals. Obviously, the central offices often need those field operators to kind of tell them what's the right step for those hospitals, right? And so for me able to say, hey, I've been in the hospital, the staffing is, a mess or is an issue, like here's my plan. Here's my plan of action because I really am running those units. And so I think that training really helped. And I think that's kind of where there's a bit of that make or break moment for veterinary nurses, veterinary assistants. Some of them need the team around them to push them forward, and that's amazing. Some of them are going to say, I'm going to be the one that takes charge. Many times it's the overnight nurses, right, who are kind
Yeah.
of like calling the shots. And then from there, those teams often decide, like, do I want a career in management or do I want to stay clinical? But I think that that training is unlike any other, being able to make decisions under pressure. And I think the other part of it is also being able to really kind of tolerate kind of imperfect situations. Leadership, as we know, is there's no playbook. Every situation is different. You can never predict a human, reaction to something. And so just going in and saying, like, I'm not sure how this drug is going to work or what this blood work's going to show, but I'm going to keep moving forward. Those lessons that I've learned, I think, have really served me as being able to be a leader, both for general practices, urgent cares, and now in the emergency space.
Yes, I have to share with you because I think of all people, you will appreciate this. I can't tell you how many times I have told other leaders emergency medicine is what prepared me for leadership. And it's exactly what you explained. It's being able to pivot and function in the middle of chaos. And I've had people throughout my own career history, things maybe are going wrong. You have these fires everywhere and
Sure.
people say like, "How are you so calm?" And I'll say, "Have you ever had 5 patients trying to die on you at the same
Yep.
time overnight?"
Exactly. Yep.
I mean, yes, it's stressful, but this doesn't feel like that.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
gives us a competitive advantage, if
For
anything.
sure, for sure, and that's that resilience piece of kind of, the first time you go through that, of course, you're terrified.
Yeah,
17th time you go through that,
yeah,
your brain builds that resilience to say, "Okay, I got this."
no big deal.
And then as a leader, when you're faced with the, 97th weird new challenge of, new law, new whatever, you're
Yeah,
like, "Okay, we'll figure this out."
exactly. We've got the time, and it's not 2
Exactly.
AM that I'm trying to figure out
Exactly,
the
right,
puzzle.
nothing's dying, we can figure this out. Exactly.
Let me ask you this, with the pace and as we know, the emotional intensity in emergency hospitals being extreme, what leadership qualities become especially important in that setting?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think you hinted at some of them initially. It's the ability to pivot. Leaders, and especially when you get into like program and project management and ownership,
Mhm.
so easy to anchor yourself to your idea. So, for example, in people who are in field roles or hospital roles, any of that, they'll think this is a great idea. I want to do this for my hospital, and then you kind of get your claws in it. You hold on to it, and then when that thing turns out to not be the best solve, or there's
Mhm.
challenges, or there's feedback from your team saying this is not the right thing that we want, you kind of double down, right? Versus saying, okay, let's shift. And so I think that ability to just be constantly seeking feedback. And so in an ER, you seek feedback, the doctors seek it from the nurses and assistants, the nurses and assistants seek it from each other, the customers seek it, there's always this
Sure.
constant search for that. And you're kind of constantly adapting. Think of a gold standard estimate, and then we say the owner can't afford it or doesn't want to proceed with that treatment, you got to pivot. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the big ones that's a key to learn. It's very easy to see yourself or think that your idea is like the right idea. And you sometimes have to say it's bigger than that. It's what the team wants or what the industry wants or what the direction is. And you have to be able to change on the fly. I think the other thing that ER really trains you for is really the ability to make decisions and stand in them. Find that, especially with leaders that I have worked with, from kind of the hospital manager or veterinarian on up, even to the field leader level, sometimes I will say, I'm not running your hospital. What do you want to do? What's the decision? And then there's like I don't know, right? Because there's
Mhm.
always been maybe somebody else who's made that decision.
Sure.
And so you have to figure out what the facts are, figure out what your point of view is, shoot make the shot, right? Decide what shot you're going to call, and then stand in that and say, it's not right or wrong. It's just the decision I made at that moment. And it for sure is never perfect because sometimes it backfires. But you learn how to kind of do that because ER doctors, ER nurses have to say, patient's in front of me, vein is blowing, catheter's not the right size. What do I do now? And so I think those two things are incredibly useful. It's funny because I've now, in this point in my career, started to realize where there are some kind of hangups in my emergency training. And I think part of it is really in that kind of long range strategic thinking. ER professionals can attest to this. It's very short term, right? What do I do right now in the next 5 seconds? And
Yeah.
we're very good at that. And when you are kind of overseeing a group of hospitals or managing a company, the decisions are broader, they're wider, and they often take a lot more time to really figure out where you're going and they take more time to implement. And
Yeah.
so you have to sit in that position of, am I making a reactive, short-term, fast decision? Have I, done all the research? Have I talked to all the right stakeholders? And so I think those are things that often folks that grew up in ER have to actually learn when they move into strategy work or operational work.
Yeah, that's a great point. In your experience, what are some misconceptions people have about what it's actually like to work in a 24-hour emergency hospital?
Sure, sure. So I think one of the first ones is although there are days like the pit or ER or any of that, there are some days where it is kind of controlled and there's just a little bit of a kind of buzz and a hustle bustle, but it's not chaos all the time. There are days where you do have a full staff. There are days where everything goes right. And so I think there are days where it is the slow, right? The S word. There are days where you go,
How dare
okay,
you say that?
I know, right? Bad. Nothing's coming in, but I think that the highs and lows are part of what makes it ER. So that I think is there are days where it's boring. It's
Yeah.
actually boring, right? And so then on the other side of that, the extremes are that there's days when it's incredibly challenging. So I think that's one of the first misconceptions. I do think that the second misconception is that while general practices of course deals with this stuff too, that ERs don't deal with like shelter cases and kind of tertiary care and some like absolutely they do, right? They have people who drop off animals, they have people who surrender them, they have the
Yeah.
animal control coming in. So it's somewhat very similar to like a human county ER. And I think
Mm.
probably an average person or maybe even a leader who's never worked in the ER thinks that it's kind of like their patients overnight, right? The spay, the dental, that kind of thing.
Right.
We do deal with drunks and people that are high and all of that kind
Mm.
of stuff at 2 in the morning. And so it is that gritty reality of dealing with folks that probably would never go to the fancy general practice. And that's
Yeah.
totally fine. So I think those are probably the two misconceptions. I think probably the third one is that, it is like the movie show where everybody's firing out orders and has this like very well orchestrated, the cameras are moving. Sometimes, you've done CPR for the third time that night and you're just doing CPR and it sounds like a kind of wild and crazy thing to do. But for these nurses and doctors, that is just yet another skill. Emergency surgery, there's always that like amped up kind of adrenaline stuff from the show. And sometimes you're just doing your thing. You're putting the drape out, you're getting the instruments ready. And so I think those are some of the most common misconceptions. Now, the cool thing on the other side of that is there absolutely are moments where it's like heart pounding, the dog is bleeding, and they're getting the chest tube in and doing all of that. But those are, on average, probably a little bit more few and far between than people imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. Way back in the day, typically when I did ER, it was overnight. And I always viewed it as like an honor and a privilege that we
Yeah,
pulled everyone through, for the day shift
totally.
to come in type of
Yep.
a thing, right? Or
Yep.
at least that was the goal, that we got
Yeah.
everyone through the night,
I
right?
will tell you and again, just a shameless plug, the overnight nurses, I mean, everybody in vet med is a superhero, right? They chose a career that is kind of, and especially in ER, you're constantly working uphill because there's always more patients than you can deal with per person. But the overnight nurses that have chosen that shift and committed to that career, there is a just special place in heaven for those
Right.
folks who, as you said, keep the doors open when the day shift or swing shift go home and get their rest.
Right.
They are working, the opposite hours. They do have to make decisions. I mean, some of the overnight nurses that I've worked with, and I've worked overnights, but have never done that as a career, are some of the sharpest, most talented, can get the IV catheter in with one hand
Yeah.
kind of situation. And I don't know if they know that about themselves, that
Right.
truly these hospitals would not exist, pets would not get care. And so to your exact point, whenever I come in, I always remember when I would come in on day shift, I would always, 7 or 6 a.m., run around, start emptying trash, cleaning up, getting
Yeah.
the laundry done, right? And a lot of times the overnight nurses will look at me and be like, well, we were expected to do that before our shift, or we were going to get, yelled at by day shift. I'm like, no, 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 I got you guys. I'm not doing rounds until 8. Y'all get it. And I would start to tell them, get out of here, go, shoot, you
Mhm.
got this. Because a lot of times they'll just be there, and then a case comes in at 7 and they're stuck till 10.
I
So
know.
I just absolutely like, heart goes out to the overnight team, because they really do work the worst shifts and they keep
Yeah.
the teams open. And just thanks to you guys for that.
Yes. Can I that reminds me, I need to make a PSA for the day shifters.
Yes.
Do not walk into the hospital and say, "Things look pretty under control," because I
Ooh,
can't tell you how many times
yep.
I would work overnights, pure chaos.
Yep.
We started clearing everyone out a few hours before day shift was coming in, and
Right.
by the time they came in, it was calm, and they're like, "Are you guys not busy?" And you're like,
I know. Yeah, the worst thing is that, yeah, I mean, it's so funny now we're sharing those stories, but the worst thing is when the day shift is like the trash is not taken out. I'm like, oh no, don't say that. Don't say that. Also, the other thing, right, is they come in, you got your coffee and you're kind of
"Yeah,
wandering around, and the overnight's like, we've been sweating, 2 people called out, what's going on? So I think just day shifters having that empathy
yeah,
to, especially if you've never worked an overnight shift, you are dealing with less staff, right? You don't have all your
yeah,
people.
yeah,
And so come in and respect that, understand
yeah."
that, put in a little effort in the beginning to kind of get them out, I think goes a long way. But to your point, that's so funny. And that is the worst thing to say, oh, yeah, was it a quiet night? And the overnight's like, you know,
Like, it's like, if you were here 2 hours ago, you would have been
yes,
quiet.
exactly. Check the cameras.
With emergency medicine, we're kind of talking about the difference in shifts. And of course, I tease because every shift is critical, right?
Sure.
But we know that it brings together doctors and technicians and assistants and even the client service team all working under extreme stress, typically. In your opinion, what makes a high performing ER team actually work? What's the
Yeah,
secret?
great question. So, what I will say is there is no perfect recipe on day one. And what I mean by that is like when you're either opening a brand new hospital or you are a new manager or you're hiring a new hire, you never know how that team is going to integrate. So, what it is really a constant kind of continuous performance improvement process. So, you start with who you are, whether you're the new manager and you have your team on day one, or you're been there for 10 years and you're taking a fresh look at your team, whatever it is, you look at the distribution of the team. What does everybody do well? What is everybody's opportunity? And then you first understand that all of that has to gel. So there has to be overlap. There have to be stars in IV catheters. There have to be stars in patient care, and they have to really be distributed across like the schedule and the different shifts so that synergies evolve. You can't stack all your high performers on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Your Friday, Saturday, Sundays will always fail, right? So that's, I think, the first thing to look at is like skill set, kind of like personality types, all of that stuff has to really, really kind of, I guess vibe is the right word. And then the next piece of it is you're constantly working on your game. I'm not a sports person, but I've studied a ton of sports psychology because I think it's fascinating. And it's really interesting. Like, first of all, everybody kind of chooses to go into sports. So this is different. Like you choose your career, but you're also paying your bills with it. It's a little different. And so there's like less, I think, of the like, I have to stay in the job because I've got these issues. There's like that stress that you get put on when you're in a role like that. However, sports people, of course, always are embedded in that. And so the interesting thing about sports is that they're talking about plays like all the time, right? You get out on the field, you run a play, you go back, you
Yeah,
review it. So there actually is like an analytical kind of constant continuous improvement piece that you've got to do with teams. So one of the easiest ways to do it is like after a code, do a debrief. So the code happens and then you take a minute, you pull everybody together and you talk about what went well, what could go better. And it sounds like such a foreign thing to do, but you have to kind of start from the premise that like the code didn't go perfectly and how could we be better? And that talking, that opening up of the blind spots, the kind of opening of the log jams between people or
yeah,
identifying equipment didn't work, all of that constantly makes the team better.
yeah,
And the third thing that all of that does is really builds the psychological safety for the team to speak up in really a more kind of acute way rather than like having, for example, having the code, it didn't go well, you have a feeling, you suppress it, and then you never deal with it. That's what I think creates a lot of toxicity and like that kind of resentment, burnout, and things versus having an environment where your manager is listening and saying, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm so sorry that IV pump is a piece of junk. Like, we got to review that.
right.
Hey, I didn't realize that Jane had never gone through recover the CPR training. We got to get her that, to do that. And I think those things put together is what kind of makes a high performing team, but also takes teams and makes them high performing versus
Yeah.
like identifying every team as high performing or not. It's really what takes any team and continues to move them on kind of the a more high performing basis. Really, I think that's it. It's like thinking about continuous improvement. It's thinking about overlapping synergies, and that kind of all together is what you have to do in ER to make the teams great. You know, in a general practice where you're scheduling, say, surgeries on Tuesdays, you can put your surgery nurse on Tuesdays, right? But you never know what's coming into an ER, so you always have to have those layers. And then you're always dealing with imperfection. So it's always about like, how do you get a little bit better versus I think those extreme labels of like our team sucks or our team's great. Like
Yeah.
it's just all about always getting better, and knowing you're always kind of in some level of imperfection.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. So hopefully every ER team is listening, taking some notes.
Sure.
David, with your experience, which I think is just so valuable that you're sharing your perspective because you have seen a lot that, for example, some technicians or assistants or even veterinarians maybe only have had the opportunity to work in one or two locations, right? So their knowledge of what good looks like or what bad looks like is limited. But again, in an operator, regional, vice president, national role, you get to see a lot more. In your opinion, what are some of the most common either cultural or operational mistakes that leaders might make when running emergency hospitals?
Yeah, sure. So since there's so many groups of hospitals now, I'll kind
Mhm.
of speak to my like regional multi-site people for a minute. I do think that the biggest mistake, and I don't think many of us make that, thankfully, but I think it's a good thing to call out, is that they treat them all the same. And I think of every hospital as an ecosystem. And if you want to even think of it even in a sillier way, it's like a it's like a pizza or a pot of stew. Like it's different every time you make it. So you can follow the recipe down, you can hire 10 RVTs and 3 LVTs and 5
Mhm.
doctors, but those people are different. And so the interactions between them and the chemistry, truly the chemistry is different. And so every every multi-specialty hospital, any of that has really their own unique challenges. And it's funny because when you deal with certain issues at one hospital and go to the next one and ask them questions, sometimes they're not dealing with that. That just works and there's other opportunities. So I really think it is about this idea of kind of the sum of the parts, right? Every unit or hospital is like its individual approach. And you have to be, again, back to pivoting. You have to be very ready to be like, okay, I'm working on this with hospital A and this with
Yeah.
hospital B. I think the other probably biggest like mistake that leaders make is the lack of presence. ER, non-ER, if you are, practice owner down to manager, down to corporate entity with regional operators, you got to be there. Even you're in a regional position, you just have to be there as often as you can be, right? Because you are managing multiple hospitals. But if you are the manager of a hospital, the administrator of a hospital, I will say, and I will stand by this, that I think sitting in your office 8 hours a day and not being present is not, you're not going to have the team's respect. And I don't mean you can't have, of course, office days, but the team, if you think about the people, quote, in the trenches, they understand you have large meetings with your board or with the doctors or whatever it is, but they also want to see that you're listening to them. And by doing that, you have to get feedback from them, and that has to be in person. And so being at the hospital, I think having, special like on the floor times and and office times, I just don't think that it is survivable as a 9 to 5 kind of just in the office job. And I mean, obviously if you're like the administrator of a 1,000 person clinic, that's a little different, but like an ER,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. The ER is happening on the floor.
Yeah.
And so the way that I always train teams, and I've tried to always kind of push myself to do, I haven't been perfect, but push myself is like, take your laptop out on the floor, right? And be like answering
Yeah.
email while you're there. And you can put the laptop down
Yeah.
and go help them hold a pet, wander around the lobby if you have a lobby or the back room and talk to the customers, right? And engage with them and say, hey, I'm so and so, I'm the manager. Is there anything I can help with? How's everything going?
Mhm.
And even just seeing that, your teams will go,
Yeah.
what? Like they'll be blown away. And so being present with them, I think really helps because then you can't solve problems you don't know about and then you'll uncover a lot.
Yeah.
So I think those are probably the two big things. One is kind of treating them like cookie cutter if you're a multi-site operator and just lack of presence, working a regular schedule, not showing up for your night weekend crew. That's going to kind of be negative on your reputation very quickly. And I would encourage you to just shift to support your teams when they need you.
Yeah. Two call outs from what you've said, and it really resonates with me with my own experience personally, but also what I've seen through
Sure.
multi-site enterprise level leadership.
Hmm.
So you called out being present throughout different times in the day and night, depending on, if it is a 24/7 practice, right?
Yep.
And I would even drill that further down to that includes the local leaders. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with practices where the administrators, whatever you want to call them,
Hmm.
the administrative staff work day shift hours.
Yep.
And you know it very well. Your hospital teams will always tell you they don't care about nights and weekends
Yeah.
because
Right.
maybe there's a shift lead or team lead or whatever we want to call it, but there's not a hospital administrator, there's not a practice manager. They never show up. And for me, in working with the spec ERs, one of my requirements was if you are signing on for this role, you have to show face. Maybe you're not working every
Yeah.
overnight. That's not realistic,
Yeah.
but you have to put in the time. And I would agree, even if you're a regional operator or again, whatever the title is, you shouldn't be showing up only in the day. Show up during a swing shift, show
Yep.
up on a Saturday, show appreciation for the team. And I would also say, and you mentioned this, is to understand that these individuals are living this every day.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes, yes, it's not cookie cutter. They are unique, but I think coming from a place of seeking to understand. So don't come in thinking you know everything because you've worked in one spec ER,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
ask questions, be inquisitive,
Mhm.
understand why that team does things the way they do it because maybe they do it better than
Yeah.
what you've seen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you said is gold, and I agree fully. And I think things that come up for me, one is when you were talking about the working different shifts. If you were, as you said, whatever level you are, if you said, where's your team right now? Right? It could be 10 o'clock at night or 4 in the morning. And if they said they're at the hospital working, my question would be, okay, how are you supporting them? How have
Right.
you connected with them? And
Yes.
if the answer is like, there's a pause, then there's a problem, right? You need to have connected with your team. As you said, it's not every day, it's not every shift, but
Yeah.
you have to support every team member as a human being, and that means interacting with them face to face. I remember when I was managing, it was a 24-hour, it was like a ER GP. It was really an interesting hybrid. It was like a 24 hours. We saw GP during the day and then stayed open at night. And I worked probably the latest that I could ever work when I was on swing was like midnight one. I would just like kind of
Yeah.
collapse. But I was now in a management role and obviously had to be there, right, for some days for meetings. But I would every month come in at 4 a.m. and I would work, 4 to whatever it was. And I would get, like, there was a Starbucks that was open near the hospital, actually opened at 4. And I would get all the overnight coffee
Yeah.
and would come in and cook breakfast. And it was like kind of a joke, but it was also very clear it was a boundary. I would get people to come in early. They would all come in the lounge. We'd close the door, be for overnights only. Nobody else got coffee. Nobody else got breakfast. And I'm telling you, the smell of bacon and the smell of
Yes.
bake, the day shifters were like, what's going on? I'm like, not for you guys,
Right.
And so just things like that, where you shift your schedule
Yes.
to stretch and strain yourself a little bit so that you are making that sacrifice for them, I think goes a long way. And I think that, it's about trust and respect happen over a very long period of time. You build trust kind of brick by brick. And I think there's a saying, something about like you can spend a lifetime gaining trust, but break it in a second, something like that. And it's so true, because our egos are at the point where when you get that sting or you're upset, immediately everything can go out the window, but you can't ever kind of rebuild that if you don't start doing it one brick and brick. And so showing up at 4 a.m., showing up at midnight, showing up on a Saturday, that adds one brick to your circle of trust, whatever it is with the team. And there's always going to be the, hey, they don't show up that much. And look, that's true. But at least it isn't they show up never, right? And there's that distinction. So I think all of that, what you mentioned, makes sense. And then the last thing I'll say is the seek to understand, lead with curiosity is huge. I will say, really, any leader, you could be the CEO of, I don't know, Honeywell or Starbucks, or be a seasoned retail leader coming into vet med. And if you walk in and you think you know about labor management, or you know about inventory control, or you know about culture and development, you do in the other vertical, right? In the other industry. And those skills are translatable for sure, but every industry does it their way. And so you have to learn. And so to your point, in VetNet has a way, a culture of operating. And I think you're right. The best leaders will come in and be like, hey, tell me about your day. Tell me about what you do. They'll sit and observe and then they'll, make the connections, but they won't say, we have to hit these reorder points because that's how I did it in another
Yeah.
industry or another company, or heck, another hospital, as you said. So I think you're right. Seek and understand is huge. It also, again, humanizes that leadership experience. You're asking an individual human being their lived experience around a problem you're trying to solve. You're not forcing your opinions, your take, or whatever onto them. It allows them to speak from their heart and from their experience. And so I think that's huge. And that's probably the most important leadership lesson ever. If you don't do anything that we have told you to do, seek to understand
Yes, yes, I love that. Well, here.
first.
Okay, last question for you. If an emergency team member was listening today and they want to grow into leadership, what skills should they start developing now? And I feel like you kind of answered that, but
Yeah.
let's tie it up in a beautiful bow.
Sure. So this is such a fun question because this is basically what I do every day now. There are, veterinary nurses or assistants at Veg or at other companies, and they either have been put into a leadership role or applying for leadership roles, or they're in their role and they're developing. And I think there's two things that I'll leave you with. One is when you think about career growth and development, this is going to sound kind of, I think, hard hitting, but I think it's an important lesson. What got you here won't get you there. And what I mean by that is it's not what got you here is bad. It got you there for a reason, right? You were either chosen or applied and selected because there's something in there. There is potential in you to be this amazing,
Sure.
like let's say veterinary RBT to manager. But when you take that job, you are a day one manager, right? And there are people that are 10, 20, 30 years in as managers. And so what got you to the day one manager is not where you'll be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 days, 90 days. So start thinking about your internal opportunities. What are the things, and I think modeling the way is so important. So you need to find another person or another group of people where they are a little bit more seasoned, more tenured in the role, and start to say, where am I at now and what do I need to be to get there? And obviously coaches and support and all of that is very useful. But I think that's one of the biggest things is kind of starting to do an internal process of breaking yourself down a little bit and saying, I'm so good at where I was. I was an expert in that first role. I'm now into kind of like a new journey, and I have to be really patient with myself to build through those skills. The second thing that I'll say is when you get into management, it becomes a really tight kind of rope between proactivity and reactivity. And the managers, and this is now for like managers that are in the role, the managers that burn out are the ones that are always reactive and putting out fires. Now, the problem is that fires are part of our job. They come up, we have to deal with them. But if you don't go through a process of, so for example, Friday night overnight shift are called out, right? And you're like, I've got to figure this out. You have to then book time in your day, whether it's the next day or week or month or whatever, to sit down and say, okay, what happened? What was the root cause? And how do I start solving that for tomorrow? Because what you'll find is as you start to do that, those fires start to go down and you've created systems and processes that make the hospital sustainable, make you sustainable, all of that. And it happens, a million different ways because we have so many different operational challenges we live with. But I think those are the two big things to start to flex the muscle of strategic thinking. What's the thing that I'm focusing on and I could predict for tomorrow? One of the things that I think happens in the ER is we have seasons. And so if you are in May and June is right around the corner and your cases are going to double or triple and you haven't started to make preparations, it's okay that, you're learning, you're in a reactive mode. But then next year in February, you got to start thinking, how
Yeah.
am I going to tackle June? Right.
Yeah.
And those are the skills that vet nurses, RBTs, VAs, LVTs tend to in the ER not have innately because it's often always about what's coming at you and you're just dealing with that. And so those are the two things that I would say to focus on. One is this internal, just understanding you're now learning a whole new set of skills and a new way of operating. So be gentle on yourself, but figure out what your opportunities are to grow. And it is like a little bit of a shock to your system to say, man, I'm kind of a day one manager. I'm not the expert anymore, but that's
Sure.
great because it means you'll become an expert again. And then the other one is start to sort out the tackling of fires, the reactive approaches, which feeds you really well when you're a nurse, right? You're saving the day, you're doing
Right.
all of that stuff, but it won't serve you as a manager, leader, operator, owner, all of that. You have to start thinking about, okay, what was the thing that caused that thing to happen, and how do I fix that underneath stuff? And then it's so hard for managers to realize, but the goal is for you to be dispensable, not indispensable,
Yeah.
right? Dispensable. You build sustainable systems and processes that run when you're not there. And that's how you turn management into a 20, 30, 40-year career.
Yeah.
So those are really the two things that I would offer to folks who are thinking about management. And what I would also say is don't be scared of it. It's an incredible journey. The mess ups are very different. You know, you're interacting with human beings, you're growing them, you're giving back to the industry because you are taking people and making them better. And you are leading a business that provides an incredible service to the community and to its pets. You're providing jobs for vet nurses, for vet assistants, for doctors. So don't be scared of it, but take it on as a major challenge and wear it as a little bit as a badge of honor because it's an incredible thing that you do. And, you know, the industry couldn't exist without owners and managers. The hospitals wouldn't run. And so the job has to be done. And I would encourage everybody that has an interest in it to for sure look into it and consider it as a career.
Yes. David, thank you so much. This was so fun. I know we've not talked in a minute, and this just reinforced why we're friends. I just enjoy you so much. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'm just going to put a pin in
Sure.
place
Sure.
that I'm feeling like you and I might need to do a live episode at 2 a.m.
I love it. And I love it. I'm here for it. And we could figure out a way to get it into the hospital so we could take
Yes.
live questions from overnight.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
I think or overnight, maybe the managers show up at 2 and like
Literally.
that that would be great.
It feels like a calling
I
for
think
us.
so. I think so. That would be like kismet. It'd be so much fun. That's
Thank
our
you
part
so
2.
much. Yes,
You're
yes.
welcome.
To
Yeah,
be
it was great to see
continued.
you. I agree. I agree. Yeah, it was great to see you, Bridget. It's always great to talk with you. And agreed. I think you know, you and I are kind of kindred spirits, and it's been so fun to work really alongside you for so many years. And you know, I know we'll be connecting in the future soon.
Thank you.